Welcome, welcome. It's your girl Karina. Welcome back to Eye of Karina. On this channel, I share with you my perspective on astrology, which is why it's called Eye of Karina, because I know I'm just one person and there's so many more perspectives. But today we are going to walk into the battle of spiritual wars, because within every spiritual community, there is a war to be had. And within the astrology community, the war that is constantly going on is whether sidereal astrology or Western astrology is accurate. Which one is right and which one is wrong? Okay. And I'm going to now present to you my presentation of the differences between tropical and sidereal astrology. Grab yourself a cup of coffee, a cup of tea, some water, whatever, so you can waken your mind up to this presentation, and I'll see you at the end so I can share with you how I utilize my astrology. A lot of people are confused about the differences of sidereal astrology versus tropical astrology. Let's begin unlocking and debunking how this could be. What we know about sidereal astrology from a surface level is that the astrological position of the zodiac signs are lagging about 24 to 25 degrees behind. Let's say that it's currently about 24 or 25 degrees Scorpio on one day. In tropical astrology, it's actually 2 degrees Scorpio in sidereal astrology on that same day. And so what this lagging occurrence happens is that people who look at their birth charts, they could say, I'm born on this day and I'm told that I am, for example, a Taurus in tropical astrology, but in sidereal astrology, I am an Aries. How does this work? How do I know which one I truly am, and how do I know which system is accurate? We can dissect sidereal and tropical astrology in various ways, but first we're just going to look at the stars. So what are the stars? First, we need to answer that question. Well, there are actually two sets of stars. So the first set of stars are the constellations. These are these cluster of stars in the sky that create shapes and forms, and we group them together and call them constellations. So that is the first set of stars. This constellations with clusters of stars, these are called fixed stars. So why are they called fixed stars? They're called fixed stars because the stars in the constellations and in the clusters, they don't move in relation to each other, meaning that they're always the same distance from each other. They do not change in their distance from one another. They are always measurably the same distance from one another. But the entire belt of the constellations as a unit, as an entire unit, does move. And this is what we call the precessions. So in relation to one another, those stars do not move in a certain distance from one another. But as a unit, they do move. And it actually takes over 70 years for the stars as a unit to move 1 degree. So that's a long time it takes for them to move just 1 degree. Okay, and that is the constellations. These are what we call the fixed stars. So what are the moving stars? Because there are moving stars. Well, we are going to say that the planets themselves are moving stars. The planets are moving stars. The moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Pluto, and Neptune, these are all moving. They are all orbiting around the sun. They're moving a lot faster than the constellation, right? But most importantly, they are moving in relation to one another, which means that the distance between the planets changes very often. We see this on a daily, weekly, monthly, and yearly way in which the planets change their distance from one another. Sometimes they are in alignment with one another on the same degree, and sometimes they are really far away from each other, right, in an opposite degree. Now, the planets also move what we call in declinations. And what is important to understand is that they have the ability to go up and down. They have that ability to move, whereas the fixed stars do not move in this way. The only way that the fixed stars move are in a unit, okay? So now we have answered what are the stars, and we have agreed that there are two kinds of stars. There are the clusters of stars, which create the constellations, and then there are the planets, which are moving stars. So we have fixed stars versus moving stars. Now, the sidereal utilizes and looks at the constellations first. They base the entire astrology on the constellations. And this is why they will say that they are using the real astrology, because they also measure in the precession, the movement of the constellations as a unit, right? They also measure the fact that they also see that certain clusters of stars are going to be a little bit bigger than one another, right? So this is where you get like Virgo looks a lot bigger than Libra. And when you look at the zodiacal belt, when you look at the constellations, you can see that this is the true nature of the constellations, right? And sidereal utilizes the true position of the constellations. So as you know, in tropical astrology, we read the natal chart as this circular wheel. And we are going to discuss how this works for us, and this will give you more insight into how this two-dimensional chart that you see on paper or on your computer screen is translated into our three-dimensional cosmic universe. So let's get into it. On this map here, you'll see that this is a map of the globe. And right in the center is what we would call the equator. This is the belt around our Earth, right? It is the middle point of the Earth, and it goes all the way around the globe. That's the equator. Now, you'll see that there is this wave that is added to this map. This wave is what we would call a sine wave. So what is a sine wave? A sine wave is a mathematical curve that describes a smooth periodic oscillation, okay? And what that basically means is that this wave is measuring a movement of some sort of body of mass, right? And what this wave specifically is measuring is the movement of the sun. Now, it's important to understand that the sun is still and does not move. It is us on Earth that move around the sun. But from Earth, it appears that the sun is moving. And this sine wave is the path of the apparent movement of the sun from our perspective on Earth. This is what we call the ecliptic. The ecliptic is the sun's path through the zodiac wheel. We'll see here that we have the zodiac signs on the left. This right here is showcasing the sun's path from Aries to Virgo and into Libra and all the way to Pisces. This is a continuous path, the sine wave, so everything is constantly moving. So this is how we derive the natal chart. It is based off of the ecliptic movement. It is following the sun's movement through the zodiac wheel and across our equator. So this is how we come up with the circular chart. But now let's look at the zodiacal belt. The zodiac belt is a 360-degree circular belt. This doesn't change whether you are utilizing sidereal or tropical astrology. The zodiac belt is very much so 360 degrees no matter what. In tropical astrology, we break down the zodiac belt into 30 degrees segments, which create 12 sections, a 360-degree circle, and broken down into 30-degree segments. Now, in comparison to the sidereal astrology, certain stars appear to be bigger and trickle over into other signs. One example is Virgo, which is not contained in the 30-degree segments that we create in tropical astrology. In the sidereal astrology, looking at the zodiac belt, the Virgo constellation of stars is bigger than 30 degrees. So some of Virgo's stars are in what we would call Libra. And so in sidereal astrology, looking at the zodiacal belt, they don't completely see the 30-degree segments. So this is one difference that we see with sidereal versus tropical astrology, is that in tropical astrology, we utilize the 30-degree segments and break down the zodiac belt in this very way. So there you have it, my friends. The distinct difference between sidereal astrology and Western astrology is that sidereal goes off of the exact position of the fixed stars and their accurate space that they take up in space, right? Sidereal goes off of their actual size of the clusters. So a sidereal seems to have the win when it comes to their accuracy. However, when we're going off of the sun's path and the seasons, this is where Western astrology gains its accuracy, because the sun's path is fixed. It does not change. And so the seasons are always going to be as the seasons are as they are, and that does not change, at least for now. And because of this, you can clearly say in Western astrology that somebody who's born in the winter versus somebody who's born in the spring have different personality traits, have different identities. And somebody who's born in the beginning of the season versus the end of the season also has different identities and personalities. And so Western astrology utilizes the zodiac energies, but also utilizes the seasonal energies in order to create their meaning behind the zodiac. Whereas sidereal astrology utilizes the fixed stars, but also the moon mansions, which are the nakshatras. That is the difference, because sidereal is not going off of the sun's path. The sidereal is going off of the fixed stars, whereas Western astrology is going off of the sun's path. So, that's a whole lot to understand, and I hope that you guys have been able to digest some of that. So now the question is well, which one do I, want to use? A lot of people will go off of either their logic or their feeling. Okay, a lot of people will say, well, I just feel like I'm just more accurately my Vedic chart speaks to me more. Or some people will say, well, I more accurately feel more tied to my Western astrology. Feeling is a very important thing to discuss when we look at astrology, because as human beings, we create story and we create meaning, which means that behind both systems are the human addition of creating meaning, right? The seasons have a meaning, therefore we come up with these conclusions. And in Vedic astrology, the nakshatras have a meaning. They have stories and meaning behind it. And that's how they come up with their conclusions, right? In which an astronomer who's completely against astrology would say, well, they're both wrong, So we have to understand that as humans, we go off of feeling and meaning a lot of the times, and this is what informs our beliefs. With that being said, I believe that both systems are accurate for me, and I could utilize seeing myself in both systems. And I think that they both work very accurately for me. So for you, I think that it's about discovering what it is that you feel and which one you give more meaning to, or if you would like to incorporate both, as long as it doesn't drive you crazy, then go ahead and incorporate both. It's actually really fascinating to discover it. But based off of the actual facts and the science, there are some questions that even I, as an astrologer, still have. One of them being that if we follow the fixed stars, which are lagging behind, well, if they are lagging behind but are moving, right? They are moving but lagging behind. That means that the time that we are living in versus the time that people experience thousands of years from now, the fixed stars might be in a different position at that time. So how accurate is it if it's constantly moving? That's one of my questions, you know? And one of my other questions is that because the fixed stars, the actual stars, are behind, does that mean that when you look at Vedic, are we in the past? Are we moving backwards? There are so many questions also about the seasons, because the precession of the equinox and the movement of the seasons, the movement of the poles are shifting. Clearly not tomorrow, but it is shifting. So because everything is moving, is everything as it will always be, or will these meanings change? And if things move in the future, generations upon generations from now, what will they make of the astrology? So those are my questions. And hey, if you have answers, please go ahead. Let's have a discussion down below. But if you're going to come to this channel, just know that I do abide by both systems. I do study my Vedic chart consistently, and I do respect both systems. I do think that they have accuracy in their own way. So that is me debunking the difference between sidereal versus Western astrology. And look, if I discover some amazing gold nuggets, you best believe I'll be back with a part 2. Peace and love.